So we shall continue. It is really a pleasure, and we are so happy that our keynote speaker, Ms. Kati Duikerts, is ready to talk about the European perspective of quality assurance. Kati has been, you work as a director at AEGES, sorry my Finnish pronunciation. You have been also working as being a board member of ENQA for many years. So we are talking about Europe, but beyond Europe there is the world. And Kati promised to swim across the Mediterranean, Mare Nostrum, and talk about Africa, the great continent. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I press the button.
Okay.
Should be there.
All right, and then just listen.
Yeah, or you can use this pointer as well.
Okay, fine.
But you have to use this.
I've got to use a microphone.
Yeah, or if you...
No, that's fine. Okay. Thank you very much, Carl. And thank you, Elka, also for inviting me. What a pressure. So, consideration of quality assurance, that's how I'm going to try to talk about it. So I will start with some introductions in a few words to tell you where I come from in order to understand my understanding of the quality assurance. So that just fixes a little bit the perspective. Then I will go a little bit on the Paris communiqué to give the general framework, and I will base my consideration on the scope of quality on some recent publications and studies that I had a chance to have a look at, and that will feed in for IQA as well as EQA. And of course, I will wear a little bit my hat of ENQA board member in order to speak about the diversity of systems. And then, as Carl promised, we'll go a little bit to Africa, as I'm a lucky person to be involved in a quite ambitious program, initiative. AQUA means harmonizing quality assurance and accreditation at the scale of the continent of Africa, so imagine that. And then just a few words of conclusions. So, as the introductions with the S, I've been working for the French-speaking Belgian quality assurance agency for 10 years now. Before that, I was a director of an adult education center in Brussels, a big school with 5,000 to 6,000 students yearly. And before that, I was a teacher for 2 decades, approximately. I was born and raised in Africa. Maybe that's why I've got some connections with that continent. And so to speak about the French-speaking Belgian system, just to give you a picture of its size and diversity, we have 4 main providers. Universities, they count up to 6. University colleges, almost 20. Art schools and conservatoires, and also adult education centers. There are 84 concerned with a provision of higher education programs. So that gives a little bit of a total of 220,000 approximately students that are mainly going to university and university colleges as a whole, as a majority. However, you can see that adult education centers welcome quite a lot of students, mainly in the level of bachelor's, but also the level of one degree below, sorry, of 120 credits, a sort of intermediate qualification before going to the bachelor's.
Just may I ask, is all our French speaking?
This is French speaking. Yes, so it's a regional system, not so big, and the territory is tiny, very small territory, and you see how many institutions there are, 124. So this is a highly fragmented system, and that makes a lot of work for the agency because it's so much fragmented, and so that's quite complex for us. So, for instance, bachelors exist at the level of university, and usually they are the way to go to master's studies and then PhDs, of course. Whereas in the other system, you have both bachelor and master's, but usually the bachelor can lead to professional field directly. So people are ready for the workplace. One slide to summarize the agency IQS. I will start from the right and speak about the international aspect. So we've been reviewed twice by ENQA, and we've been full members of ENQA since 2012 or 11 I think, and registered also in the consequence of that. And we are also one of the co-founders of the French-speaking network for quality assurance agencies that is called FRACSUP. That's the logo to the right. This quite informal network was established in 2014 because we thought that it was useful to have discussions and meetings and collaboration and in French on the subject. I mean, quality assurance is quite complex, and we have to talk about quality assurance in English, which is the case in most European events. That reduces the possibility for people to join. So the French approach was based on that, not that we necessarily want to defend French over the world, but because we wanted to have a possibility to connect easily. And one of the first tasks that we did was to translate ESG 2015 into French. What an adventure. I don't know if there are people connected with translation interpretation in the room, but we know that translating a text is already a sort of betrayal. So the very first step was to try to make sure that we understood properly the English version, the only official one, and make sure that we understood the same things. The second step was to decide what French to use between Swiss French, Belgian French, French French. That was quite hard. And even when we agreed on words, for instance, governance is gouvernance, of course, that's easy. It doesn't mean the same in the systems. A French governance is quite top-down. A Belgian one is a lot of talk, participation, commissions, people talking to each other. So that's quite different even when we describe the criteria, guidelines, reference, etc. So that was quite an adventure. Now we are growing as a network because there are more and more African French-speaking agency joining. So there are more people from Africa joining, and we also have the Canadian, Quebec, Commission for Education that has joined. So in the center, you see a drawing that represents our set of standards. So there are 5, basically. And we are, for the time being, an agency that works only on programmatic approach. That's in our legal framework. And this is why we are presently in a pilot phase for institutional reviews that will only start next year. So you see that you are well advanced on us concerning institutional reviews. So we are just beginning. The way we assess programs, well, we can say it's student-centered. I was, thankfully, I got some translations from Hilja during the first point, and I kind of understood that student-centered learning or teaching is quite a debate. It's quite a subject to discuss. Our interpretation of it is backed up by our legal text for higher education that requires from each institution to provide programs that are explained to the public, to the students, in terms of learning outcomes. And so all the programs are defined so. And there are also lots of practices in order to support students in their progression within the program, their path. In fact, one specificity of the French-speaking Belgian system is that higher education is open to everybody as soon as you've got your degree from secondary school. There are only exams for medical studies, engineer studies, and art studies. That's all. All the rest are open. So there is a wide open access to higher education. As a consequence, there are lots of people who are not capable to succeed in the first year. As a consequence, there are lots of practices to keep them going and to help them find their ways in the system. So this is why we can say, thanks to the global approach of the national policies, that it is student-centered because it promotes that sorts of things. But of course, we could go into more details. How we proceed, there are about 1,000 programs, and we have to assess them regularly. So we do cluster them. So for instance, if we have to assess sociology, we will put all the programs of sociology in one cluster and go to the different universities that provide that sorts of program at the same time with the same panel as much as possible, or bigger panels if necessary, and people shifting. So this kind of approach permits us to have the expert make analysis at the micro, meso, and macro levels. I mean, there is an evaluation report for each institution about these programs, so that's the micro level. Then we ask the panel to produce a transversal analysis, namely how sociology is taught in French-speaking Belgium at that moment, so the diversity of the programs and so on. And in the agency, we make a meta-analysis every 2 or 3 years out of the several transversal analysis. And there, from discipline-focused reports, we try to have more structural analysis. For instance, what's the place of languages in the programs? What's the link between research and education in those programs, etc., etc. We are somehow forced, and happily forced, to get a fitness for purpose approach, because we do deal with the 4 sectors, one agency for the 4 sectors, and only one set of standards that is quite generic and that every institution can adjust to. So in the standards, we have one criterion about governance and quality policies, because even though we have a programmatic approach, we need to make those assessments in context. So these governance and quality approaches, policies are important in order to put that assessment into context. Relevance, internal coherence, efficiency, and equity of the programs are the core elements that are being assessed. And we are focused on enhancement because there is no legal link between an evaluation and the authorization for the institution to provide a program. This is another process that is made before by the government and other regulatory bodies, so we are not in connection with that at all. So this is why we can say this is focused on enhancement, because there is no sanction, there is nothing behind that. Also, there is no link with fundings, so there is no connections either with the process of evaluation. Evaluation is there to provide room for improvement, and of course to give information. So we publish all the reports. So that's the way we operate. We have a staff of 12, a budget of 1 million euros per year, and we are located in Brussels. Institutions don't pay for the evaluations. That's why the budget covers most of the costs of the evaluations. Okay, the Paris communiqué, so that's just a few months ago, and with my ENQA hat, I was happy to be able to attend this event with lots of people coming. Many ministers of education attended, so Europe was highly represented, but there were also representatives from other areas from the world. Basically, the communiqué is celebrating the progress made. So that was an occasion for people to say, okay, that's a progress we've made. So they were celebrating also some anniversaries as well, 20 years of the Declaration of Bologna, and then 10 years for ECAR, for instance, and things like that. But of course, they could see that there were some patches of problems for implementation. So taking implementation forward is still necessary. And seeking further innovation in teaching and learning. So yes, teaching and learning was a main focus in that conference, in that declaration. I've just written the main key messages that were provided during those 2 days of discussions. Of course, it's a funny place to be because you know that the communiqué is almost ready. I mean, it's already ready, more or less. And people come and they take the floor and they speak about what they do in their countries to go along with those lines. And that's very interesting because it can give a picture of what's going on through the world. So it requires for more social dimension, and the word to use today is inclusiveness. So that's very popular nowadays, and it means that you have to think about how to bring into the system students that would not usually come in. So that's something that was much focused. The digital evolution or revolution for some. So yes, that's a key point to work on. Several messages also points the synergies to have and to strengthen between research and education. So that's probably one interesting point because education seems to be quite a priority, but research must be connected with it, and how to better work on that synergy was a crucial discussion too. Cooperation, quality assurance were also stressed, and then this interesting concept of European universities, which I will quote, I'll put into quotation marks. One might think that every university located in the vast area of Europe is a European university by definition. But you may know that President Macron wanted to put forward a new concept, as he said, and that was his idea in order to promote Europe and to bring Europe a bit forward. So there is a lot of discussion of what is a European university, how it is funded, because there is a pilot program starting. Maybe some of you have applied for that program. There are some funds that will support the establishment of cooperation between universities. And basically, on paper, it could go up to have European universities connected together, but having a common governance. I wonder how is that possible really in practice. At least the framework is to promote cooperation in research, in education, and provide, in the end, European diplomas. So I wonder how countries are ready, or to which extent countries are ready to delegate that competence to a European something. So there are, it's not clear at all for the moment. So either it's a big publicity approach from Macron, that's one option, or it is something that is much more ambitious, and the future will see. But for the time being, there are some criticisms as well. And my minister had quite a daring speech because he started by saying how much he supported the idea of those European universities. And then he went on with pointing all the problems, or at least the points of attentions. So I don't know. We will see in the future, but that was one of the points of this communiqué. Okay. If we consider external quality assurance, we can have a look at ENQA, that is the membership organizations that has a political role because implied in some, in all the discussions at European level in order to promote quality assurance in Europe, but also offers several services to its member. At this moment, we have 52 members, full members, coming from 29 different countries, and 57 affiliates. Affiliates are not necessarily agencies, or there might be agencies that want to become full member later, but there can also be some bodies with interest in quality assurance that will not ask for being members in the end. They are coming from 32 different countries all over the world. I realize that this is the copy of yesterday and not the copy of this morning, Carl. Not this morning. Okay. Because I added the things for this morning, but I will manage. Sorry for that. Okay, some reflections on the scope. Well, because of this ESG 2015 that says in its introduction that the expectation for higher education requires a fundamental shift and requires a more center-student approach to learning and teaching, it is not surprising that learning and teaching are very, this concept, this part is quite important in the scope of quality assurance. To talk about its implementation, I will suggest to have a look at the new publication from EUA. I think it was released just a few weeks ago. And so you are familiar with the trends publication that are taking place every couple of years and that are based on the questionnaires and contacts, interviews with responsible for from different universities throughout. When I use the word universities, it is the generic word, of course. It concerns all kinds of institutions. So I've got here a few spots on this. They had decided to focus on learning and teaching and see what is the situation at the level of those institutions. And they explore the national regulations and structural support to institutions in terms of learning and teaching. They had a look at the institutional strategies in the institutions, the policies and procedures in place. They study programs, the way study programs are defined and implemented, the pedagogy, the different approaches, and also the staff. In fact, who are the teachers? What is the percentage of teachers full-time or people coming from the workplace and coming and giving some conferences in the system? How do institutions value teaching? How do they balance teaching with research in the career path of the teachers? How teachers are trained, etc., etc. So you have a wide range of information. I checked the figures and I noticed that both Finland and French-speaking Belgium are not in the text because the number of institutions that answer the questionnaire is too low for methodological reasons. I think there were 4 or 5 from your country and 3 and 4 from mine. So we are not in the text. I mean, we are not quoted as countries, but we are taken into the considerations of the global statistics, I think. The main conclusions of this report are that EUA suggests that the government continue to support and support better the institutional strategies on learning and teaching. It is important to see that in some countries they are a bit back behind because there is no framework to support the institutions in that sense. And also the report points the importance and relevance of collaboration. Collaboration among institutions within the same country, but also collaboration within institutions at a local, regional, international level, because through these collaborations, a lot of things happen in learning and teaching. It's an excellent way to provide new experience, new methods, innovation, etc. So that's the main conclusion, but the report is full of details. If we want to make a little in-between focus, we can have a look at the e-learning. And I will refer to a recent presentation we had at the General Assembly of ENQA, and ENQA attended that assembly. So we had a session that is called Quality Assurance of E-Learning Principles and Challenges. If you go on the ENQA website, you will see this presentation that refers to lots of things that happen. There are many actors, there are many people concerned with e-learning, and the working group of ENQA has also written a very interesting report on this that gives a good news in a sense that the consideration of quality assurance, both internal and external, about the quality assurance of e-learning is perfectly easy to find within the ESG. There are different ESG that deals with that you can perfectly include that. You don't need a separate set of standards for e-learning. It can be included easily. And the report details that, so you can see on every reference how to manage. So that's one focus. By the way, when I was in Africa, and I will tell you in the end, there was a great deal of e-learning concern at that in Africa, probably because of the wide continent and the lack of infrastructures. So they have really developed e-learning, and they've got quite sophisticated set of standards about e-learning in several countries. Well, the first little paragraph is from the ESG introduction again. And so you see that the focus is on learning and teaching, including learning environment and relevant links with research and innovation. But in addition, the paper says, but doesn't develop that within the ESG themselves. So that's introduction only. Institutions have policies and processes to ensure and improve the quality of their other activities, such as research and governance. That's interesting to note that in the ESG, they really put a focus on teaching and learning, and that's probably due to the fact that students, teachers were among the participants around the table to rewrite the new version of the ESG, and they really wanted to have this strong focus on that activity. But I would draw your attention to the fact that the EQA Forum, so the External European Quality Assurance Forum that is coming very soon in Vienna in November, in 2 weeks' time now, has chosen a theme that says broadening the scope of quality assurance. So how can we take into account the range of institutional activities? In other words, the question is, can quality assurance be applied to everything? Has it got limitations? To which extent? So that's the theme of that conference of 2 days. So we will see probably more. Still in the last ENQA General Assembly last October, I would like to say that among the 9 poster sessions, so there was a poster session with proposals from different agencies to present something. Out of the 9, there were 4 that wanted to stress on research. So this is present. You could have come and put a poster session with FINEC, of course. But you see that in Armenia, they have a quality assurance of doctoral programs. In the Netherlands, they have a evaluation of academic research. In Ireland, they are starting the quality assurance of research education. And what was presented on that was really a quite collaborative and open discussions with all the stakeholders to start with. So they kind of gathered, the funds providers, the working place and the institutions, etc., to discuss about the criteria that would be needed for that quality assurance. And they are still developing it. And in Iceland, an interesting approach as well, that wants to develop a quality enhancement framework that is not so much focused on quantitative indicators, but has a wider range of approaches, including the connection of research with the strategy of the institution, the connection of research with its visible or measurable impact, the connection with the supports, etc., etc. So more ESG-minded than really classical indicators for research. So that's just to give a few examples. Okay, I also read an interesting study that was published a few months ago by UNESCO, the IIEP department, and under the edition of Michaela Martin. And this study wants to, or has the ambition to identify international trends, innovative practices, tools, good principles for IQA, also the obstacles and the drivers. So that's more detailed. And that study, and that's where I had put a second slide, and I have to develop without my slide. But anyway, that study came into two aspects. First, there was a vast consultation online, and there were over 300 respondents over around 64 countries that answered that questionnaire. And there is a second part in the study that is the development of 8 different study cases. I noted down the countries: Austria, Bahrain, Bangladesh, Chile, China, Germany, Kenya, and South Africa. So there are 8 study cases that were selected. So the study goes with the general findings from the inquiry, plus the different chapters concerning the different countries. So in the first inquiry, Europe is mostly represented. In the study case, there is only Austria and Germany that have their place in the list, and the other countries are more spread, as I've just mentioned. One thing that is coming out from this study is that most universities, and again, considering universities, there were, if I remember well, 63% of universities with a PhD being the highest diploma. There were 29% of institutions delivering a master as the highest diploma, and I think 6 or 7% of institutions delivering a bachelor. So that is to say that the distribution of institution is vast. And that probably explains also that among the scopes, the idea of quality assurance for employability is quite present in the study, because there are lots of institutions that deal with professional programs of study. One point that comes out from the study is that most institutions struggle with the same obstacles. The way to find the right balance between centralized and decentralized systems concerning higher internal quality assurance. The way to find the right balance between academic interests and other interests, student interests, but also the labor market interests and management interests. The difficulty also to find cost-effective systems. You can go to systems that are really demanding in terms of investment resources, human resources, and what impact. So to find really the balance and to find those systems, it's a frequent challenge. A global finding also is to point out that so far there is a lack of research on the impact of quality assurance. Well, this is not a new story, but still it's quite hard to find research on that theme. So there is also a conclusion from the study to ask scientists to work on that. The main lessons are there. The importance of flexible qualitative tools, so that this idea of flexibility, that function in an integrated manner. So there are many things that were explained by the respondents that emerge everywhere, and the problem is to find a way to integrate them. That's one point. Because then, if you don't, you end up with information overload, and that's quite, it's not a good incentive. I mean, people get discouraged by that. There is a need to balance academic, that was one of the corrections I had made, and employability-related tools. And that's probably the tension between the different perspectives and the different needs of institutions. And also the study stresses the importance of a dialogue on quality improvement among the different stakeholders. So there is a need for communication and a need to speak with all the stakeholders on these, and particularly to see what is bringing success, what is bringing enhancement in that field. Okay, beyond Europe. So that's the name of the initiative, AQUA, which is part of a wider program that is called PACAF for Pan-African Quality Assurance Framework. So in that framework, there are other tools that are being developed, such as a framework for qualification throughout Africa as well, a system for credit transfer, for students' mobility, for teachers' mobility. So the classic ones that we know, they are thinking of as well. There are already quite a number of systems in place. As I mentioned yesterday to Elka and Carl, the first external quality assurance activities in Africa took place in Nigeria in 1943. And that was because of the English wanted to make sure that the programs provided by your school that had been established there were okay. So some areas started quite long ago. Of course, that was not a quality assurance agency working, but it was the first sort of activity of checking the quality of the programs. Of course, there are also places where there is nothing, so it's quite patchy. What they share as challenges throughout Africa is certainly first a massification, because you know that the population is growing at fast rate, probably the highest populated area very soon. And so there is an urgent need to ensure the relevance and the quality of provision. There are many governance issues, and that translates into the ASG. There are specific items for governance. There is inadequate funding, and there is a problem of using properly the funding when there is funding. So that's quite a challenge. Of course, consequence of the other topics, the student-staff ratio is not appropriate. There is a lack of qualified staff, and there is a real brain drain. Many Africans who can afford go abroad, study abroad, and don't come back. So there are problems in universities to keep their staff, to keep their researchers. And there is also a need to improve research capacity and innovative mindset for social economic development. So that's the global picture. So you see, that's huge, but they are very lucid about that. So modestly, the ENQA role in the consortium was to coordinate and participate the work of a technical working group. So I've been part of that working group. With Paula Ran from ENQA, we were the only European persons in the working group. As you can see, the picture was taken in ENQA's Brussels offices. And around the table, people from Egypt, from Mali, from Kenya, from Namibia, South Africa, and Mozambique, and am I forgetting someone? Nigeria, precisely, I think, by memory. So those people are coming from institutions and from quality assurance agencies. And the task that was given to us was double. The first task was to draft the ASG and to develop a review methodology for agencies, which is quite new. And I'll give you a quick look at the results. From the outside, we can believe that ASG is a copy-paste of ESG because there are three parts. A part one that will look at standards and guidelines for institutions, a part B that look at external quality assurance, and part C that looks at internal quality assurance for agencies. So that's true, the structure is the same. Why changing something that proves well in Europe? So that was the idea, to keep the structure. Now within the parts, you can read here that the biggest, the longest, the most important part is part A for them. And this is basically due to the fact that we worked from the existing framework that were collected to start the work. So there was a compilation. And as I've mentioned, for instance, they put a standard 2 specifically on governance and management, separate from standard 1 or other standards to think about the vision and the objectives of the institutions. Interestingly, there is a standard 9 for research and innovation. So there is a specific standard. I will show you it in a minute. There is something about community engagement. There is something about collaboration, mobility. So you see that to answer the challenges that were identified, they really wanted to make a lot of focus, a lot of importance on all these standards. My personal feeling is that that's too demanding, that's a lot, but they really wanted it. So we will see how it works. For the second part, it's more like what we know, with the idea of independence of evaluation, the reports, the existence of complaints, appeals, etc. I mean, the usual things that are necessary for quality assurance. And for the agencies themselves, you see that they added a standard for benchmarking, networking, collaboration, because they believe that was important to focus on from the very beginning. But the other ones are quite similar with what we know.
Do they have publication of reports?
Yes, that's in. It's written there. In fact, it's in the standards B. You have that in standard 5, decision and reporting. So yeah, it has shifted, but it's there as well. So that's just to give a look at the research and innovation standard that is there and that is not in our ESG, so you can see. So you see that they really wanted to have it. Just a slide for the agency. So this is an ongoing process. This is happening now, that agencies are being reviewed, 5 agencies being reviewed and 5 agencies having a support visit. And so self-assessment, expert panel, site visit. We don't know yet who's going to be the coordinating body. Well, for the pilot, it's not complicated. It's a consortium, but later on. And decision body making, will there be a continental African Continental Agency. That's on paper, we don't know yet, and the follow-up. Just to mention that the consultancy process for those ASG was made in 4 different languages from the very start, so English, French, Portuguese, and Arabic. So the draft document was written in those 4 languages, the online consultation, the workshops, etc. So that's maybe raise a question of, is it a good idea to break a common standards into different languages, or is it more unifying to use the same one? A question, we don't know. So we will see, but that's quite starting now. I will conclude by saying that the sector is quite dynamic and quite diverse, from the studies on IQA as well as the studies on EQA. You can see that there is a great variety of systems, that there is a strong influence of ESG that makes the teaching and learning a predominant focus, but management, research are also, employability are also important foci of quality assurance, and there is a lack of research on the effects. That question is the topic of the closing plenary session of the ECA forum that will take place in 2 weeks, and it will be presented by Mr. Van Dam from the OCDE. So I will listen to what he says and see how far we go, but I couldn't give the answer today. So kiitos.
Thank you. Kiitos, Kati. Thank you so much for this very interesting and profound perspective you gave us. Really, and now lunch is a flexible concept, so there's enough time for a few questions, so please. Okay.
If I may start. Dear Kati, I always feel that there is a lot to do in this developing countries like large Africa, and we've been working a lot in Caucasus and developing the systems with a lot of problems. But what would your advice be to us? For we've been kind of well developed in a sense that we are a small system, and we've been able to run already 2 full cycles with very good participation, and we almost have everybody on board. So what we should do next in order to develop? What would be your idea?
You are trapping me in a tricky question, Elka. You know, Elka, Finec and Finland is a model for many European countries. So how I just said that we are just starting the review cycle, institutional review cycle. So we don't know what's going to happen. I think that. What I will answer another way. What makes you a model for us is a capacity that you seem to have to keep all the stakeholders in dialogue constantly, and that's a strength. And if you remember your days in the ENQA board and the discussion on the different agencies and the system, so we have to have a look at systems and agencies through their own reviews. We see that there are many places where quality assurance is changed from one picture to another because of reasons that are behind people's possibility. I mean, a change of government, new trends, etc. And whoops, there is a full change and there is a lack of continuity. And I think that in Finland, for instance, there is this taking account of what has worked and looking openly and sincerely on what's still a challenge and reflecting together. I think that's one of the most strengths. So I would just say, keep going. I'm sorry, I can't say more. Carl, this gentleman wanted to say something.
Kuule haluaa puhua.
Yes, thank you for your speech. What didn't become clear to me was if your agency, when you have done a review of a university, so are you going then to give a sort of certificate quality stamp to that university and then have a register and the second question is then are you also open for other countries' universities to do reviews in other countries?
Okay, quality assurance is embedded in a national or regional culture. In my country, French speaking because very different from the Dutch speaking, French speaking culture, everything that is connected to labels, stamps, ranking, classification of is terrible. It's awful. Nobody wants that. There are some exceptions though. So recently, a couple of years ago, we were asked to work with CTI, the French agency for engineering programs, because they deliver the EURACE label that you know as well in Finland. And we worked with them because the 4 universities asked us to work with CTI, and so we had one joint mission. So the obligatory evaluation by ICAS was combined with an accreditation by CTI, because universities wanted to have that accreditation. In the package, they were also given the automatic recognition of the diploma on the territory of France, so the graduate could go and get a job. I mean, in the public sector, in the private, there is no need, but in the public sector, the diploma is automatically recognized for the duration of the accreditation. So for these reasons, people ask for labels, but otherwise, it is very, very very few developed. I mean, people are not specifically interested. Considering your second question, in the legal framework of ICAS, there is no indication of that, but there is no prohibition either. So if we had the possibilities, I mean, sufficient resources, I mentioned 12 persons, and a lot of work on this fragmented system, but if there are possibilities, there is a will to go abroad and to have experience, generally combined with the local agency or with a. I mean, there must be another motivation that just to answer the demand of one institution, there must be something that is connected to a development.
Thank you. Raili Ponni from Aalto University. Thank you very much for your speech. We see it very importantly that the inclusiveness of all institutional activities in quality assurance, so that means in addition to teaching and learning, research and impact and so on. You said that this issue is now rising very much all over Europe. So what would be your personal view on the future of inclusiveness of all institutional activities?
Well, in the Paris communiqué, they insisted on that, and there were several testimonies from several countries explaining specific ways to work on inclusiveness. It is coherent with the learning outcomes approach. It is coherent with the competence approach. So it goes on specific tools like the recognition of prior education or training, or it goes into the way different profiles of students are incorporated in the student body of an institutions. It can be about the guidance. It can be about a lot of things, and I don't see any way it will stop. I think it is just there to develop because more and more people start studying at different ages and in different contexts. Without forgetting the growing importance of online education, which will probably picture the sector quite differently in the future. So the perspective is that we all have to adjust quality assurance as well to these new development. But it's a translation to me of a good thing that is to keep the students at the center of the whole thing, and to see how best we can support the development of each individual. So broadly speaking, I think it goes in the good sense, but it makes the system more diverse, and so it's quite complex to handle, I think, at a national level or at a regional level. And that means that the dialogue between the different stakeholders is even more important to make sure that we are not on the wrong path. But again, it's just a thought more than a precise answer. I'm sorry.
Any more questions? Perhaps you noticed an article, not just on Helsingin Sanomat, just 2 days ago, that which will be the biggest town area in the whole world in 2100. So 80 years. It will be Lagos, Nigeria, 86 million inhabitants. Think about that. And now it's lunch, and